said that I'm a little nervous, and nervous isn't the right word. It's just unsettled because I don't like making people mad, right? I don't like doing that. I don't want to do that. I also know that in one of the things in the middle of a spiritual battle is that anyone has the ability, if you will, to be blinded to what is true. And so there's lots of good people who have been blinded to what is true. And I am not immune to that, right? So I'm sitting here saying things and I'm like, okay, I've got to make sure that I'm not blinded either, right? And especially whenever you start really trying to apply Scripture to the world around you, the waters can get muddy, okay? It's not always black and white, right? It can be challenging. And so I thought of this clip. I want to show this little clip. This is kind of where I feel, and I think actually a lot of people feel this way. How many of you are familiar with The Lord of the Rings? It was a book first, by the way, not a movie. And also, if you didn't know, The Lord of the Rings is written by Tolkien, who was a avid, staunch Christian, and he wrote that book to tell the story of the Bible, of the gospel message. I mean, and you see the themes all through it. But the basic premise in the Lord of the Rings is there's a hobbit, and you know, he's kind of the weakest and meekest of the people, and he has to carry this ring that represents evil, that it corrupts all that it touches. And anyone else, it would corrupt them, but he's having to take it. They're trying to destroy the ring, and they're going through, and all kinds of crazy things happen to them. So they've just been through some crazy battles and things like this, and there's a wizard, Gandalf, who is kind of the wise one that's leading this group. And Frodo, the hobbit, who has the ring, comes to them and kind of has this moment. As you know, the hobbits usually, life is just peaceful and tranquil. That's what their lives are. And now he finds himself in this crazy adventure. And listen to this little dialogue.
I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. There are other forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil. Bilbo was meant to find the ring, in which case you also were meant to have it. And that is an encouraging thought.
So what is he saying? He's like, I wish none of this happened. I wish we weren't in this place. And I love, so do all who find themselves in such a place. No one wants to be dealing with that. And then he says, remember, there are other forces at work here, right? So not only is there evil at work, but there's also good. And maybe the good has called you to this place. Maybe that's why you are here. And I think it's important for us, because as I look at our society, as I look at our country, I wish we were not in the place that we were in. I wish that we would have been more faithful to the principles that were instituted at the beginning of this country, right? The basic principles of governance that we love to say that, and I'm a constitutional guy. I think we should follow the Constitution. There's no one really following the Constitution right now. It doesn't matter which political party is out there. We're so far away from that. I mean, we are. Things have changed massively, and so now we're in a very difficult place to try to even go back. But that's what we need to be trying to do, moving back towards a smaller, limited government. But we're in these difficult, frustrating times, and it is challenging to know best how to move forward. And what I'm seeing, especially now, and there's lots of debate within the church of how do we deal with this. And there was a Barna research. If you're not familiar with Barna, they do lots of polls and surveys within church life, and they're very good at what they do. And this has been pretty consistent. But we think that this election is an important one, and it is. I believe that it's a very important one. Over 50% of Christians who are active and consider themselves Christians, not just kind of your cultural, oh yeah, I think I'm a Christian. I went, was that 3 years ago I went to an Easter service, right? No, these are people that actually are engaged in church. Over 50% are not voting. That is a fairly consistent thing if we look back through the years. The Christians, the church has not been near as active in the voting process as you would think it would be, and sometimes the way that it's portrayed, right? So we're close to 50% who are not. So I just immediately assumed, I was like, oh, okay, well, it's because the two candidates, and I'll just say this: if you're happy with the candidates and the choices that we have this year, let's have a discussion, because I would like to know why. I would really, really like to know why. But so I just assumed that it was kind of that, right? It was either, well, I'm not a Democrat, so I can't support Kamala, but Trump is this orange guy who's really mean and really ugly and says all these horrible things, and so I can't, as a Christian, vote for somebody with that character, right? That's the portrayal that you would kind of get as to why people would be sitting it out, if you will. In the survey, they ask the question, why aren't you voting? The response was, well, I'm just not interested in politics or elections. 68% of the people who are not voting, the Christians who are voting, the reason that they were not voting is not because Donald Trump is horrible, is not because of of Harris. It's because I don't really get into politics, and I don't really care about elections. Whew. The church, we have failed this country. We have not taught what is true, and we have not applied a biblical principle to the world around us. And we've been in this place that was created that is unique, and we don't recognize it. Well, that's a good start. Y'all all heard that, so I'll have to dub in if they may have picked up some of it. So, but we are in this place that we think the norm. They just died. That's all right. Just put me on Molly's. All right. We think that we are in this situation that is common. In 1776, whenever our Constitution, it was later, when Declaration of Independence, when this country was founded, it was founded differently than any other country in history. It was recognized that the government has way more power over its citizens than any other institution. And it recognized that can be a really bad thing. And so they intentionally made our government small. And our government, if you remember, what is the first line? We the people. Our government is us, right? And it was created that way on purpose. But it required that people would get involved, because they wouldn't want to go back to an authoritarian type of government, right? And we did that for a long time. And then the church just became complacent. And we started having arguments over separation of church and state. We started having all of these things. And I can remember the way that I was taught in seminary is, be careful. Politics, you don't want to get involved in that. That just makes people mad. It just divides. You don't want to tick people off. And that's not the role of the church. The role of the church is to stay out of government, right? And so that's been going on for a long time. And so the general consensus, even today, you'll see the different arguments. And in fact, I would say that the majority of pastors still believe that it's best not to get openly involved in political things, right? But we think that we'll just keep going in the same direction, that we'll always be able to worship on Sunday morning. We'll always be able to share our faith. Why would a government ever persecute Christians? Please look at history. Please look a little deeper in the headlines today. Have you looked over in some of the areas in Africa, some of the Coptic Christians? Google Coptic Christians. They're being killed all the time. Right? Over in Azerbaijan, right now, there are Christians that are being persecuted and murdered. Right? We are not there yet. But this is the direction that we can easily go. In England this week, and you say, oh, well, that's England. Well, we kind of follow behind them, right? They used to recognize that it was important to have at least a semblance of religion, right? Now they also wanted the king, which is why we kicked them out, right? Because that's way too much authority. That's centralized, that's huge government. The larger the government, the smaller the citizen. Understand that. The larger the government gets, the less you matter. The less freedom you have, and you may be able to still be comfortable in that. Some governments, they're still fairly good, and they're going to be nice to their people, right? But they may not be nice to you, especially if you start speaking out against that. The larger the government is, the smaller the citizen. And we recognize that. And so we wanted to make a small government because the individual was important. Right? We wanted to elevate that. And that came from a biblical understanding that God created all of us in his image. And that makes a difference, and that matters, and that's important. Right? And so we have this situation that we're in that is challenging to navigate, to say the least. So you have pastors that say, no, I'm just not even going to talk about it. Then you have those who will talk about it. Hey, it's important. It's important that you get involved, but you just do it. Whatever, it doesn't really matter who you vote for, but at least get involved. And we don't talk about the worldview difference. We were able to do that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we move forward. But then there are those who think that we should only talk about the Bible. I was reading a post from a guy that basically he's sitting this election out, and he's not going to get involved, and he claims that he's a Christian, and so people were asking him, well, how can you do that? And he kind of goes off and he says, well, really, that's not something that the church should be involved in. In the pulpit, the pastor should be talking about the Word of God in the Bible. Just stick to that. It's like, well, if the Word of God, if the Bible doesn't apply to our election, if you don't apply it to all areas of your life, we're missing the point of this, right? We're not supposed to just come and talk about God here in these walls. We're supposed to do that everywhere, which is why Christians are persecuted by governments. It's not because they come in and just talk about it in the walls. It's because they actually try to apply that biblical worldview, that biblical principle to the world around them. That is what gets you in trouble. That's why governments become more authoritarian and try to stomp out Christian beliefs across the world throughout history. Right? So I want to make the case biblically why we should get involved. Now, there's a passage that is very misused, and it's not easy to interpret, if you will. We use it as an out, and that's Romans 13. Right? Romans 13. This is Paul. He's writing, and he says this: "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities." Where did he get that from?
Jesus. Remember when Jesus said, render to Caesar what is Caesar, to God what is God, right? For there is no authority except from God, and that those exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. All right, now, many times what we look at that and we say, oh, it says be subject by the governing authorities because they're there by God. And so it means we don't get involved, we just do what they say. Okay. Just a very simple reading of that, you could come to that conclusion. However, what happened to Paul, the guy who wrote this? Yeah, he was executed by whom? The governing authorities. Was that because he was doing all that they said to do? No. So obviously there's a little bit more to this, right? All of the disciples, what happened to them? They were executed by just random roaming gangs of people? No, by the governing authorities, right? So this clearly isn't saying just do everything that the government should do. That's one problem that I think people have. They just view that and they just kind of interpret that as, oh, we're not supposed to get involved. The government is the government. No, this is just making it clear. Paul's making it clear. Listen, God is still God. He is over the government. Remember what the time frame was. He's under the emperor's rule. So it's like, let them do their thing. Remember, though, that God is God, not Caesar. Jesus is Lord, right? That was the reason that phrase became so popular, that Jesus is Lord, is because Caesar, many times, depending on which Caesar it was, it would be more prominent, would say Caesar is Lord. And the Christians would say Jesus is Lord. That's why they would be thrown to the lions, right? So this clearly isn't saying just do whatever the governing authorities tell you to do. That's one. Two, this also says, what's the responsibility of the governing authorities? It is to do good and to punish evil, right? So if the government is doing that, yeah, you should allow it to do that. That's what the government should do. When it is not, I believe we have a right, and we are actually called to stand up and push back against that. We call out evil. We call out when the government is doing evil. We call it out. That's what the abolitionists did. They were looking at what the government was allowing to happen, and they were saying, no, that is evil. End it, right? John the Baptist, he has his head back now because he's restored and with the Lord, but he lost his head, right? Why did he lose his head? Because he was being nice to the authorities? No, because he looked at Herod and said, quit sleeping around. And so Herod had his head cut off. Right? So please don't tell me that as Christians, we're supposed to just sit it out and just let the governing authorities do whatever they're supposed to do. But one thing that's very important that we don't understand, is because we've failed in so many different ways, is that our system, who is the governing authorities? It's us. It's we the people. We elect people to be the governing authorities to make the laws. Now we've screwed that up so much. We've made the president way more powerful than they ever should be. All of this stuff, but we can't go into all of that. But it's because we've set it out. It's because we've allowed it to become this that all of a sudden it really matters who the president is. That was never intended, by the way. It was never intended that the president would have so much power. We've allowed it to get to that point because we've said, oh, well, I'm just supposed to sit here and do nothing and just let them do. No, we have the right, I believe as Christians in our system of government, that we have a right, a biblical right to get involved, right? And that is extremely important, right? And now I want to read another little passage in Samuel. This is Samuel chapter 8. This is when the nation of Israel has been going. They've had different judges, and so they, in a sense, were governed by judges that God appointed. They were self-governed with God leading the country, basically, right? But they get to the point, they're like, we really don't want to do this. This is a lot of work. Like, we really kind of look at all these other nations. They have these kings, and the kings take care of the big problems, and they just do the things for the people. And so Samuel, they're wanting this to happen, and I'm not reading all of it. This is chapter 8, starting in verse 7. It says, "And the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people in all they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them." All right, so our country, I'm not comparing us to Israel, okay? But our country was created with a foundational belief and understanding of Judeo-Christian principles. It was there from the beginning. John Adams says this system of government is wholly inadequate for a non-religious and immoral people. It required that we believed in God. It required that we held a moral standard in order for this system of government to work. And what we have done is we have not rejected the system of government. We have rejected God, and that has led to the crumbling of our system of government. That is exactly what has happened. And then as Christians, we've kind of set it out. And it is just causing more and more societal chaos. I love what the people's response. So Samuel goes through, you can read all of this. He tells them, he said, you want a king? Yeah, that king's going to take your money. That king's going to send you off to war. Your sons and daughters are going to die for this stupid king, right? And he goes through all this stuff. And so what do the people say? Right? Do they come to their senses? And they go, oh, maybe we should follow the God who led us out of Egypt and who parted the waters and who did all this thing. Maybe that should be our main king. No. They're smarter than that. Verse 19, but the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. And they said, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. They didn't want to get involved either. They wanted the king to do it. They just wanted to be like everyone else. That's where we are. Now, to try to bring this kind of into a current situation, basically what is happening is there are different ideologies out there of how you govern a country, of how societies work. You can go through history and you can read these. Some are, for so long, it was just whoever was the toughest. They took the power and they ruled, right? And then until someone tougher came along, right? And then you started to get kings and what we would consider dictatorships, right? But it was kind of one central figure that ruled either a city state or then a nation state, and all this has happened over hundreds and thousands of years of moving forward. And remember, Satan is involved in all of that, right? What is Satan's desire? What is the spiritual battle that desires to cause chaos? It's to move us away from God. It's to inflict as much pain and punishment and suffering on God's people as it possibly can. So systems of government, they can do that in ways that we can't even imagine. And so, yes, the governmental system is one of the major parts of the spiritual battle that we face. And so we've had an ideology that has really been evolving, since in the 1600s, 1700s, you start to see it. There's so many different names: communism, Marxism, socialism, right? Whatever it may be. But it's this collective view, and Karl Marx kind of is the one who codified this, right, if you will, like put it into practice. And it's this theory, and it's a great theory because it brings in just enough truth to make it sound good, but it is an ideology that is from the pit of hell. And I can prove that because governments have killed more people in the last 150 years than in the rest of the history of the world combined. And it's a result of this ideology. We sit here and we talk about somebody's fascist, somebody's socialist, all of this stuff. It's all the same ideology behind it, right? And whenever you look at what happened with Nazi Germany, that was that ideology. It was a socialist, the National Socialist Party is what Nazi stands for. And we say, oh, well, that's just fascist now. That's not socialist. And they're two sides of the same coin. And how many people were killed from Nazi Germany? Well, we know 6 million Jews, right? Not to mention all of the other ramifications of just World War II. And so we think that's the bad one. We all agree that that's the bad one. Right? You're not going to find many people out there that disagree with that. There's always some, but most understand both sides of the aisle. The one that we are a little less clear on is what we've seen happen in Soviet Russia, what we see happen in China, what we saw happen in Cambodia, what we still see in Venezuela is an ideology, again, whatever you want to call it, communism, socialism, whatever. That has killed, it makes Hitler look like a rookie. We don't talk about that though. The number of people that have died from that ideology is shocking. Who do you think is behind that? Do you think that God is behind an ideology that leads to the death and destruction of that many people? The answer is no. But something's behind it. And it is not a spirit of good. It is a spirit of evil. And our country, for many, many years, we were united in the fact that that was an ideology that we were not going to start implementing, right? And it didn't matter if you voted for a Democrat or a Republican. They were both united on, we don't want to do that. But around 100 or so years ago, give or take, this is very broad strokes, things started to change. You started seeing this progressivism. In fact, they called themselves progressives in the early 1900s. Woodrow Wilson was one of them. They started moving the country to where the government started to grow and started to get more and more power. And then the people started to get less and less. And over time, that has continued to morph. The country rejected progressivism. So then guess what? They relabeled themselves as liberal. People didn't like progressive. Now let's call ourselves liberal. It really jumped out in the 1960s, right? And there was all kinds of chaos that was surrounded that. They used the race issue to perpetrate a different ideology. That was just a tool to cause chaos and to cause all kinds of distraction. That was an issue that we needed to deal with. But then the progressive movement took that too far, right? And then it got rejected again. and it kind of went underground into our institutions, especially our educational institutions. And our education system is basically teaching Marxist ideologies, right? And I mean, we can get into the reason I struggle with all of this, because I know it's a lot, right? But these are provable things. These aren't just things that I'm thinking about. You can read the writings of the people, the plans that they had of how they wanted to do this, right? And so now we're at this weird and difficult place where used to you could say, hey, just vote Republican or Democrat. Democrats, you know, they want a little bit more government involvement. Republicans, they just want a little bit smaller government, but they're basically the same thing. And that is not true anymore. I use this as an example. It's like we've treated our politics like fandom, right? So I like the Cowboys. I hate the Philadelphia Eagles, right? Terrell Owens was this receiver that was just a jerk and horrible, and I couldn't stand anything about him, and then he played for the Cowboys, and I loved him. He was great, score touchdowns, beat the Eagles, right? Because we're irrational when it comes to our fan, and that's okay. Like, I'm really upset right now because of the stupid Longhorns, right? Yeah, I know. I just don't even want to talk about it. It's just ridiculous. And you know what? It doesn't matter at all. Did that impact my life? No, not at all. But I'm still emotionally invested. Well, we've done the same thing with our politics, and we've had two teams. And it's like this. It's like for a while, there were two teams playing. Let's say one of them was the donkeys and one of them was the elephants, right? Just picking things out of thin air. And you're watching the game, and so you love the elephants, so you don't like anything that the donkeys do, and until like one of their players quits and comes over, and they're like, hey, he's great. He was horrible when he was a donkey, but now that he's an elephant, he's great, right? And we treated it like that. But the thing is we were playing on the same field, and we were playing football. That's what we were playing. And we were trying to win the football championship, both the donkeys and the elephants. We're both trying to win that trophy. And they both were playing football. And then all of a sudden, you notice that the donkey kicker comes out, and he's wearing soccer shorts, and he's using a soccer ball to kick through the upright. You're like, that's weird. And you look around, and no one seems to care. It's like, it's not that big of a deal. It's just one guy over there. He has soccer shorts on. He's still kicking, right? Still using his foot. So look, most of them out there, they still have on full pads. They're playing football. We're still trying to win the championship, right? And so, no big deal. And then all of a sudden, you look out, and it's like the entire offense of the donkeys wearing soccer jerseys. And then you notice, like, the other team is kind of just going along with it. And you're like, oh, and you look around in the stands, and you're like, hey, do you not see that they're wearing soccer uniforms now? What's going on here? And most people around you are like, what are you talking about? It's just a game. Have fun. It's just you still hate the elephants. You still hate the donkeys. And then all of a sudden, the donkeys, all of them are wearing soccer uniforms. And then you notice the elephants are starting to wear soccer uniforms. And you're like, what's happening? And you look around and people are like, no, it's no big deal. What's the difference? They're still playing a game. They're still running around, kicking a ball around. All of a sudden now, you're not even using a football. They're only using a soccer ball. It's like, wait, what happened? And then you keep going, and the point that we're in 2024 is I think we have like two safeties on the elephants that are still wearing pads, right? Still playing actual football. Everybody else is kind of playing soccer, but the scariest part is that no longer are those two teams actually playing for the football trophy. They're playing for a whole different trophy. And it's like, wait, everything has changed. This is totally different. Right now, we have a Democrat Party that has totally bought in to the Marxist ideology. They are attacking free speech at every turn. Over in, and I mentioned it and then I got sidetracked, over in England this past week, a guy was praying. All he was doing, silently praying outside an abortion clinic over in England, was yards away, wasn't even by the door. The cops, you can watch this. The cops come up. What are you praying about? Well, I'm praying for my son. He had chosen and had encouraged, it wasn't his wife, but that his son was aborted years ago. And now he has repented and he recognized that, and he was there praying for his son. They arrested the guy. They charged him, and you may say, well, they didn't throw him in jail. Yeah, he owes like what the equivalent of $12,000 was the fine. He was convicted in a court for silently praying outside a distance away from abortion clinics. We have seen in our country, it's called the FACE Act. It has been used more in the last 3.5 years than in the total that it's been around since the 90s, to arrest people praying. There's a lady, look her up, Beverly Williamson. She is going to freaking jail because she has done this. This is ridiculous. There was an abortion bus outside the Democratic National Convention this year where you could walk into the dang bus and you could get pills to kill your infant. That is not what the Democrat Party used to be. So if you're still going to just blindly vote, make sure you know that your values have changed along with theirs. And if they have, fine. I do not believe that that fits with a biblical worldview, and we're going to get into more details in this moving forward. Understand it's not the same. And guess what? The Republicans aren't either. Donald Trump is a 1990 Democrat. That is what he is. He is not overly conservative. He does not carry a biblical character well at all. He's also unfairly labeled. Right? And if you're, one of the struggles that I know Christians have is, how do I vote for a guy like that? I understand that. I struggle with that too, because I want him to be better. I want him to be able to articulate what the issue is. I don't want him just to use generalizations. That does not help. He is his own worst enemy. But I want you to think, if you're struggling with him, why do you hate him? And then I want you to go and make sure that that's actually true. Right? Because the image of him is that he's this big racist. Please tell me how he is a racist. Because he's now part of the elephant team? Because he was always part of the donkey team. Now he's part of the elephant team, and so now he's racist? No, I cannot find any specific instance of actual racism. They say, he said, I guess the current president, I'm not sure, said one of the reasons he chose to run in 2020 was because Donald Trump came out as a white supremacist, because he supported the white supremacists at Charlottesville and said there were good people on both sides. Read what was said. That they are still throwing that around. And I'm sorry if you're having to use blatant lies. Did Donald Trump say that? Yes. Read in context what he was talking about. Is there were people discussing getting rid of statues. And he was saying there's good people on both sides of that argument. He specifically, in the clip that they will use, he specifically condemns white supremacy. We are in clown world, people. And it is confusing. And listen, I don't really want to vote for Donald Trump, right? Because I want someone of higher moral character. But guess what? There were a whole lot of Christians who continued to vote and support for Bill Clinton after he had a 21-year-old intern give him oral sex in the freaking White House. And now all of a sudden we're on our high horse about character. Read about John F. Kennedy. Come on. I mean, the current Democrat nominee said all of those things, right? And she's married to a guy who his previous marriage, he slept with his nanny slash teacher. That is 100%, he has admitted that. And so they keep throwing out, oh, well, Donald Trump cheated on his wife. Well, the other side of is married to a guy who cheated on his wife. A clown world, people. We have to be able to try to see through this. It's much bigger than the individuals. There's an ideology that is at work, and I am concerned. Because if we allow the ideology of this Marxist, globalist identity to infect our government, which it has more than any of us want to admit already, but we need to start going the other way. I honestly don't know if Donald Trump will truly do that. I do think he's a speed bump, and maybe it gives us a chance. I'm disgusted by a lot of the MAGA world that think he's the second coming, that won't criticize what he does. It's just as idolatrous. And he's not the answer. It took us nearly a century to get to the point to where we rejected our founding principles and now are asking for a king. It's going to take another century for us to reject asking for a king and get back to our founding principles. But that's where we are. And we have to make sure that we are evaluating all the decisions that we make, how we live our life, and we can go and vote. And it is disturbing that as Christians, we are so confused on this matter. And I encourage you to pray about it. I encourage you to seek God's truth as to where it leads you to vote. Understand we're in a difficult place, and we need to give people grace because there's people on all sides of this that have been blinded by years and years of being lied to. There's a little voter guide out there. There's actually one that's more extensive if you use the QR code out there, and it tries to kind of put a biblical picture into how we look at the two parties' platforms. And by the way, I'm terrified of the direction that the Republican Party is going in its view of abortion. It is not moral. It is a 90s Democrat view of abortion, which at least acknowledged that abortion was kind of bad. Right? But we're slipping down. Both teams are starting to look like soccer players. And we need to make sure we stand up for what is right. And it's hard. And this battle is not just going to be fought in the voting booth, but that's one of the places that it will be fought. You have to instill this in your children. You have to raise them up, understanding what is true in God's eyes. We need to be willing and understand that we could eventually live in a society that wants and actively will shut down what we believe. We need to understand that is a possibility. But God has called us to get in the fight. He's called us to get involved. He's called us to share his message, to live out the truth we find in Scripture. Let's do that. Whatever the consequences end up being. And maybe this is the end times. Okay? It very well could be. But guess what? God didn't say during the end times, sit around and do nothing and let the world go to hell. No, he said to still engage. Right? Don't go down without a fight. And thankfully, we know that the battle is ultimately already won. He has won that battle. So we know that we are on the winning side. So keep fighting. Keep being engaged. Resist the temptation just to sit it out and to feel sorry for ourselves. Let's make sure that we engage the world in every way that we can. And I believe that that includes voting. Pray about it. It starts tomorrow. Open your hearts and your minds to the biblical truth and find the candidate that most closely resembles that. It's hard because there's not many that resemble much of it. But let's put our trust in God and let's get in the fight as Christians and fight for our society, fight for the truth that we find in Scripture, and we know that we are on God's side and He is the victor. Let's go to Him in prayer.